Hey now, Brawlers, it's time for another Board Game Brawl review with Nick Minahan, sponsored by BoardGameBliss.com. Hey peoples, today we're going to take a look at Allegiance, A Realm Divided from Underground Games. This is a competitive game primarily for two players. You can play it multiplayer though as well in sort of a free-for-all or some I forget what they call it, kind of a round-robin thing where you're attacking the player to your left, that kind of stuff. But primarily it's a two-player game. And essentially what's happening thematically in the game, you're taking control of... they're not like avatars, but they're like incredibly powerful beings that have been infused by the gods. Think of like Exalted is what I was getting the impression of. So you're taking control of these really powerful champions, and you are trying to basically bring the world under your banner. But of course, you have to compete against other champions as well. You have all kinds of special powers. You have your own army that you might potentially raise, special actions, all of these different types of things. Let me go ahead and give you a brief look at how the game is played. Then we're going to come back. I'll let you know what I think. Allegiance, A Realm Divided is a competitive game for 2 to 4 players. It's primarily for 2 players, but you can do a free-for-all mode or other special modes with more players. The rules mostly stay the same between each mode. The goal is to knock your opponent's life points down to 0. The most important decision in the game is deciding which hero you will portray. You can do this randomly or by choice. Each hero is drastically different, with different powers and strategies, too much to cover them all here. But for example, the Ranger character focuses on dealing direct damage and powerful bursts, and also laying traps, while the Necromancer can't enlist units, but can raise them from the dead, while the Mad King is all about using his subjects as shields until he fields an entire army. Each hero has 2 boards. Their character board will give them reminders as to what special stuff they start with, their starting life points, and all of their various abilities. For now, you only start with the initial ability, which allows you to equip your gear. You can purchase more abilities later by paying gold. For every ability that you actually learned, you place a token on the ready space of the ability's cooldown meter. When you actually use the ability, the token gets pushed out to its furthest numbered space. You can't use the ability again until it cools down to the ready spot completely. Some abilities are in gold, and they can be used as reactions on other players' turns. The other generic board will keep track of your life points, but also your production and your gold. Your production starts at 5 and automatically goes up by 1 every round. This pays out into your actual gold stock once per round afterwards, at which point you can use it for using cards and acquiring abilities. Every hero will have starting equipment, which consists of armor and or weapons. Some or all of the equipment will be double-sided, signifying that you can choose between 2 options for that gear. Armor will typically prevent damage that makes it through to your hero, while weapons will allow you to attack the other heroes directly with or without your units, hence the damage rating on the bottom of the card. Of course, most weapons and armor will have special abilities as well. Heroes may or may not also have special cards. These represent wildly different abilities and special troops the heroes may have at their disposal. For instance, the Ranger has a Wolf Companion and Trap cards, while the Mad King has Royal Guards that take damage for him, and the Necromancer has skeletons and zombies that may come out during the game. Unless otherwise specified, every player will also start with some cards from 3 communal decks. One of the decks consists of basic units. These units can be enlisted by paying their gold cost, and then they get placed into your play area. Units have attack and health ratings. Damage actually persists in this game, and so you will use red dice to keep track of damage. The blue dice can be used to give boosts, which are essentially +1/+1 counters. If a unit dies, it goes back to the communal discard pile, and of course, units have their own special abilities. Some of these require the card to be tapped. Excuse me, how silly of me. Some of these cards require the card to be exhausted by turning it sideways, and it can't be used again until the next round. Elite units work exactly like basic units in every way. They're just much more powerful, and have correspondingly higher gold costs in order to enlist them. Action cards are one-time use cards, which you pay for and immediately discard after resolving their effects. These have a wide variety of effects, like dealing damage to units or heroes, protecting them, or drawing cards, etc. Some cards even have 2 different effects, and you choose which one you're actually using as you pay for the card. Now, turns in the game go like this. First is the production phase, where you increase your production, and then you pay out that actual gold total. Next, refresh any units you exhausted and cool down all your abilities by 1. Draw a card from the deck of your choice. Then you get to the maneuver phase, which is the heart of the game. In any order, you can do any of the following maneuvers. You can unlock a hero ability by paying its gold cost and putting a token on the ready space. You can use one of your hero's special abilities, which might include the one you just unlocked now, and list a unit from your hand by paying the cost. Play an action card. Use a card's ability. And of course, initiate a battle. You can initiate multiple battles per turn so long as you have weapons and or units that are not yet exhausted. You choose heroes, not units, to attack. Exhaust however many units and or weapons you're using for that hero. The player can respond by declaring some or all of his units as defenders, on a 1-for-1 basis. Units will deal damage to each other simultaneously, and any unblocked units or weapons will deal damage directly to the hero. After all this, you end your turn and play goes to the next person. The last hero left standing is the winner. Now, just to cut to the chase, I like Allegiance quite a lot. More than I thought I would, to be totally honest with you, because this game has incredibly gorgeous artwork. But at the same time, I had encountered a string of Kickstarter projects and seen many more of them that I chose not to back, fortunately, that were beautiful looking, but really did not deliver in the gameplay aspect, which I think is sadly becoming a trend lately, because it's not too difficult to get very competent artists and graphic designers to take a look at your game and to work with it and to make it, gussy it up and make it look really good, but then just have abysmal gameplay, or at best mediocre gameplay, attached to it. But Allegiance definitely bucks what I hope is not going to be a trend, and has gorgeous artwork and a very solid game together with it. Also very solid components, very thick cardboard, nice cardstock, those types of things. Lots of little dice, which are fine. So I think the game as a whole just looks very, very good. Now, I say all this, though, because, and I say this up front, because I do want to also get out of the way up front, that the game does have one glaring flaw, which I think if all the rest of the stuff that's in this game, which I'll get to in a moment, wasn't better, then it would probably kill the game for me. And that flaw is basically that this is very, very derivative, or at least one major part of the core gameplay is, and that's the whole card playing aspect, which is basically, it's Magic. It's Magic the Gathering. That's essentially what it is. And I don't want to come down too hard on Allegiance for this, because first and foremost, this would far and away not be the first game to borrow Magic's mechanisms and just basically make a game just like that. And in fact, it's to its credit, Allegiance's credit, that it manages to take that and run with it in different directions and be a lot better in some aspects than Magic. And definitely better than some of its imitators, like Epic comes to mind. Awful Epic. But nevertheless, I have to say that core element of playing units down to the field, attaching equipment to them, exhausting them as opposed to tapping them, and then untapping them at the start of your turn, using their special abilities. They even have a whole section in the back of the book which explains the stack. If you're familiar with Magic the Gathering, you know what the stack is. But they don't call it the stack. They go out of their way to call it not the stack. But that's what it is. So when I tell you that it's very, very similar to Magic, it's really, really similar to Magic. And I felt that was probably the dullest part of the game. Now, however, attached to that part of the game is what I think is the best part of the game mechanisms, and that is the individual characters and their upgrades. And that also helps the theme a lot too, because every character is very, very different, has very unique play styles, very different bents, what they're good at, what they're bad at, and how they want to go about winning the game. I mean, they all win the game in the same way, right? Whether it's a two-player game or a free-for-all, and I do recommend the two-player primarily. But if you just got to kill your opponent, that's it. That's the goal. But how you get to that point and how each of these different champions can make the best use of their cards and the best use of their powers is very, very different. And I love that. If you are the Ranger, you do a lot of long-range strikes that can't be defended. If you're the Necromancer, you get very few actual units to cast. but you don't need them. In fact, you get no units to cast, but you don't need them because you're summoning other units and hopefully bringing back bigger and better things, potentially even cheaper than what the other players are going to have to cast them for. There's other characters that are all about buffing their units and bringing more and more and more units out, like weenie decks, essentially, like the Paladin, and one of the other, like the free champions. I forget their names, I'm sorry. So they're all very different, very unique, and I love that aspect of the game. And I love the upgrade system as well, where you have, it's only like 2 choices for every level, but it's pretty monumental. And especially when you get to the higher levels in gold, it's like, oh my gosh, do I summon this elite unit? Or do I get this really awesome ability? Or this other really awesome ability? What do I do? I love that decision. I love the cooldown aspect. It's just so unique and refreshing. And that's why I almost feel like that in and of itself should have been the game, and that should have been just fleshed out even more. And just focus on like, okay, we're champions and we're duking it out. And yeah, we might be able to bring in some other units, but the card play should be very, very secondary. Whereas, unfortunately, the card play is a big, big part of this game. And sometimes your player powers can fade to the background just a little bit, which I think is unfortunate. But I like the aspect of how the gold works, where unlike Magic, and this is a notch in Allegiance's favor against that game and its imitators, is that you just get a perpetually increasing amount of gold, and you can choose to save some of it, stow it away, so that you build yourself up over time, but you don't have to worry about playing lands or worrying about mana production or anything like that. I do think that it's unfortunate that you have communal decks. At first I was on board with that idea, but then I'm like, well, wouldn't it have been even cooler if everyone had their own decks? But I think that might have gone beyond the scope of this project, so I understand that. But it is weird when you're well, for the Necromancer, it's not weird because you just resurrect everything. But it's weird when, say, the Ranger or the Paladin just happens to have the Abyssal Spectre, or whatever it might be, like really nasty units, or the Assassin, or the Death Knight is summoning the Blessed Healer, things like that. It's a little bit weird. But having said that, and while I am complaining about the derivative aspect of the card play, I do like that you have the elite units and that you have the option of saving up for instead of your powers, and some of them really are dramatically powerful, and I do like that as well. So there's a lot to like in this game, and so any faults that I have with it, that I wish it was just a bit different than its predecessors, and that it even went further out on its own to be a little more daring, to really embrace that character system, I think that those are still minor faults compared to what's good about this game. So I would recommend it. I would recommend it if you like head-to-head games, especially if you plan on playing it 2-player. If you love the art style, if you love the idea of having wildly different characters, vampires and paladins and all these different things going at it, and they really feel distinct, definitely check this one out. That is Allegiance: A Realm Divided from Underground Games. Highly recommend it.
Thanks for watching. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Patreon. And make sure to check out our sponsor, Board Game Bliss, where you can find an amazing selection of games from around the world. BoardGameBliss.com. Thanks for your support.